Hey everybody, thanks for coming out. I'm Neil Thompson, I'm with the books team, and this is Katie Workman. We're happy to have joining us. So Katie comes from publishing royalty, kind of? Katie comes from the Workman Press family, right? You worked in publishing for a while.
Yep.
More recently started food writing for Huffington Post and AOL, and Daily Beast, and now she is out with her first cookbook, Mom 100. And you are also the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Cookster.
Cookster.com, yep.
How old is that now?
Cookster is 4 years old.
Okay. You and Will Schwabe?
Yep.
And
Will's the founder, and I was the founding editor-in-chief, and then we had some other non-publishing people involved, but we're the publishing veterans behind it, I guess.
So I'm going to ask Katie a couple questions, and we'll open it up to you guys. Afterwards, we're going to auction off some books that Katie's going to sign, and I think we also have some brownies in the back.
Brownies are, yes, right there, being plated as we speak.
Nice. So I got to get my coffee because I need to wake up. I think you probably need to wake up too, 1 o'clock this morning.
Yeah, we got in at 1 o'clock. Yeah, my kids were a little bit on the shattered side, but luckily they had morning TV to perk them right up.
That always does the trick.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the origins of the book, kind of the backstory and how you got started. I know a lot of it's related to family and the kids.
Yep.
So what's the idea behind it?
So the idea was, I, like probably most people in this room, I have tons and tons of cookbooks, and I love them all. And I certainly am an online recipe fan. You know, I obviously wouldn't have gotten involved with Cookster had I not been. But there, there's always something about a book, and there's something about a tangible book. And I thought one day I had something that I needed, and I thought to myself, wouldn't it be so great to have one book that had all of those daily dilemmas that all parents face all the time in between two covers, so that when your kid comes home and says, hey, there's a bake sale at school tomorrow and I signed you up to bake brownies, or you're staring at that package of chicken breasts thinking, I cannot make that same recipe one more time, or you're stressing about how to get more vegetables in your kid's diet, or you're invited over the neighbors and suddenly you have to make a meal for a bunch of kids and adults, and you're wrestling with, what does everybody eat? What does everybody not eat? And if you just had that one book that addressed all of these dilemmas, and you could go there and find those answers. And it wouldn't mean that you didn't love all your other cookbooks, but that's where you went when you had one of those parenting moments.
The go-to parenting book.
The go-to parenting
You mentioned in the beginning of your book, Learning to Cook from Silver Palette, and that was one of my early ones. That's not the go-to book, right? It's a great cookbook, but it's not
It's a go-to entertaining book, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a go-to, book for, and it certainly was at the moment. It was, so creative and everything, but it wasn't that book that you went to when you were just like, I just can't, I've got to figure out macaroni and cheese because I don't want to open one more box of mac. So
a lot of this book has to do with family and your kids and really just cooking during the week, but doing it efficiently and doing it well and doing it healthily and economically. So let's talk a little bit about that. Was there kind of an evolution and a point you got to with your family where you realized I got to write the thing that I can't find elsewhere?
Yeah, I think, there was a lot of the recipes in the book are things that I was making in some way, shape, or form, but I, sort of then went after them and said, okay, if I'm gonna have one taco recipe in this book, what is that taco recipe? Like, what's the right blend of spices? Or, what is, these brownies are, it's like, I have to figure out an amazing brownie recipe that can be made in one pot, where you're not messing up another bowl, you're not, you're really just putting, that's it. One pot, 15 minutes into the oven. So, and then sometimes I was starting to figure out a recipe from scratch, where I was just thinking, okay, I need 5 fish recipes. I have promised 5 solutions for every dilemma, and I need to find 5 fish recipes that, I can say with, my head held high that my kids like and, are happy to see hit the table. So, there were things that hit the cutting room floor there. There was this Parmesan crusted fish that was so good, but my kids just couldn't stand it. So, even though it was, I think, still a great recipe, it just did not fly in my house. So then I would sort of go after recipes and go after flavors and think about what flavors my kids liked, and then how to sort of match them up with different kinds of foods that are a little bit challenging for parents.
Well, let's talk about that, because one of my questions was how you address that issue in this book of finicky kids. Doesn't sound like your kids are, but what about parents who do have kids who say, I don't like that, they just want the simplest stuff. How do you feed them well and sort of expand their horizons if possible?
Yeah.
Do you force them? Do you accommodate them?
Beat them.
Yeah.
Beat them.
That works, right? Make them sit at the table until
exactly.
you finish
Until
every
those
last
peas
bite.
deflate and mush into the plate and serve them for breakfast again. No, there's a few things that I've found to be helpful. One is when you're introducing a new food or a food that your kid is sort of resisting, serve small portions. Like, do not put a slab of fish on a plate in front of a child. That is,
or liver.
Or liver. Yes. There's no liver recipes in the book. The Mom 100 liver book, that's next. So, if you serve fish like a little, in small pieces that sort of feel accessible and friendly and not intimidating, that's one thing I do. I serve, if I'm doing a new soup, I'll serve it in like a little ramekin, like, a 5-bite bowl. And if they want more, great, but you're sort of, there's nothing threatening about the portions, at the beginning. I think that the number one tip, and this isn't, brand new news, is just the more you can get your kids involved in the preparation of food, and that includes the choosing of what to make for dinner. If you actually, like, we all sort of think we're doing it, but then sometimes I realize, like, when's the last time I said to the kids, like, what, you pick something, you get Tuesday night and you get Friday night, pick the dishes, and then there's this sense of ownership. And if you take them to a farmer's market, if you take them to the supermarket, and you're sort of like, that looks good, or what do you think looks good, or which apples do you like, then you're really engaging them. And then of course getting them into the kitchen, and there's endless great reasons to get your kids in the kitchen. There's math, there's science, there's reading, there's sequencing, there's there's just the tangibleness of making something and seeing a product that you've created and served, and there's such a pride of ownership of that. But when you get your kids, I was making guacamole with my friend's niece in San Francisco a few days ago, and she was just so excited because we had lime juice and we had little chopped, we had some cilantro, we had tomatoes, we had onions, and she was picking the amounts to add, and she was tasting. And my friend was like, she doesn't really even like guacamole, but she was making the decisions. So suddenly it was her guacamole, and that was just made all the difference.
That sort of an empowerment issue, that's one of the things I really like about the book. We have 2 boys, as you do, and that really appealed to me because that's what it seems to be about. It's about family. It is about just that idea of being together and showing your kids you can eat healthily and economically by doing it yourself, but it's also that idea of creating something and having your kids see that I made that.
And that's how they feel when they bring home something from the pottery thing. Like they're always so proud. They're showing you some hideous paper mache thing that they've made, but so why not dinner? It's the same. It's just the same sort of feeling of that's mine.
What about parents who are intimidated? So one of the things that's unique about the book is that you give options. Here's how to adapt this recipe in different ways.
Yeah.
But I think there are some who cook at home who are intimidated by that idea. They want to follow it to the T. If it says 1 teaspoon, they scrape the top off it and they get it just right. And I know a lot of people like that who are really good cooks, but they want to follow it exactly.
Right.
How do you get people to sort of relax a little bit in the kitchen and do their own thing and try new things?
Well, I think that's a really good point. And there are people who just want to be told, this is what you do, and not have the pressure of the creativity upon them. So the recipes themselves, you can follow this recipe, you can follow it to the letter. And then it's sort of like, but you can also use, in place of the asparagus, you could use sugar snap peas or snow peas or shelled peas. And so it gives you the suggestions. It doesn't just say you can substitute other vegetables for this, because that's a little bit of a broad thought. So there's a lot of sort of very specific suggestions for how you do that, and there's also just the sense of your kids are much less intimidated by that than you are. So, for instance, if you're making pita chips, you can just take your pita bread and you brush it with olive oil and sprinkle it with salt and bake it in the oven, cut it into triangles, and they're great. But you can also give suggestions for different spices that you can use, and it's specific. You can use for 6 pitas, you could use 3/4 of a cup of cumin and half the cup. That would be disgusting. Teaspoon.
Is that in the book?
Yeah, that's the first printing. But it gives specific things. But then it talks about, okay, but open up your spice jar and unscrew all these little lids, and let your kids smell the different spices. And that's like, another good way. If they pick cumin, bless you, if they pick cumin to sprinkle on their pita chips, first of all, if they don't like it, that's not such a big loss. They tried something. It's not like you made an entire dish, a cumin flavored, flank steak, and then but then the next time, if they like it, the next time they do encounter cumin in their enchiladas or their, name it, they're going to be much more likely to sort of recognize that flavor. Remember that? That's the thing that you picked to put on the pita chips.
Yeah.
That was a good call.
That worked out well.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah. How about some of the basics of your kitchen? Five or so things that you always have around.
Well, I definitely talk about that, and there's 17 ingredients listed in the book that I just sort of always have in my pantry, or fridge, because some of them are things like butter. But I would say olive oil, for sure. You don't use it in everything, but you use it in most things. Salt, kosher salt. If you have olive oil and you have salt, you can make dinner. That is just, I believe that firmly.
Just a bowl of that sometimes.
Just a bowl of that, exactly. Frankly, if you had a loaf of bread, you'd be done.
Yeah.
I love lemons and citrus, zest and juice. I think, it's like people sort of forget that, sometimes you taste something and you think it needs that little something, and many of us go to reach for the salt. You think it needs more salt. But if you try a little citrus, it really, it awakens things, it brightens flavors. It makes such a difference in so many dishes, and you use it in savory and sweet, so that's kind of nice too. I love chipotles and adobo sauce because, chipotles and adobo, chipotles are smoked jalapenos that have been then marinated in the sauce that's made from, the adobo sauce is made with tomatoes and garlic and cumin and a bunch of other spices, but it's this like little secret weapon in a can, because you puree up the whole thing with the peppers and the sauce, and you puree it in a food processor or blender, and you put it in a little Tupperware, and you tuck it in your fridge, and it stays for weeks upon weeks, months upon months sometimes. I don't know. I've never quite found the end of it. But a tablespoon of that in a soups or stews or chilies, and when you think about it, it's like, can you imagine if you were smoking your own jalapenos and then creating this sauce and then it's somebody else has done like all this like really lovely work for you, and now you've got this ingredient with a huge amount of depth and promise, and you can add it to so many different things.
I didn't know it could keep for weeks.
It can keep for weeks. And let's see, what else would I say? Canned broth and tomatoes are just two things I always have, always have, and canned beans.
So another thing you talk about is giving yourself a break.
Yes.
It's okay to order out now and then.
Yes.
What about prepared foods? Is that okay or not really?
I think everything's okay. I think that, once you set yourself up with like, I'm gonna make dinner every night. I will say I was on a panel with somebody who really did make dinner I make dinner most nights, but she said something about like her husband used to tease her that like, oh, you'd make water if you could. And I thought, oh, I would not make water if I could. I would be very happy to turn on the faucet. But I was being interviewed for a radio show recently, and so I had this crazy day, and I had a radio interview from 5 to 6. And at 7 o'clock, I was taking my kids to a dance performance at their school, and I talked about the importance of cooking and family dinners and how to get your kids involved in the kitchen from 5 to 6. And at 6:02, I ordered a pizza because I was going to go to that dance performance with my kids, and then I was going to have another chance to make dinner the next night. So, I think it's just like dealing with every day being your own reality, and things like prepared foods, packaged foods, like again, chicken broth. Sometimes I make my own chicken broth, but more often than not, I use canned or boxed chicken broth. There's obviously, especially like in a town like this, there's a lot of great prepared foods around that are made with quality ingredients and a lot of care. And I think that I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing home a nice rotisserie chicken and some sautéed greens or whatever for your family. But there's a satisfaction and a pleasure about eating food that you have made in your own home and that your kids have seen you make in your own home or helped you make in your own home. And there's something about those meals that just has that quality that feels a lot different than pulling a lid off something.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you talk in the book about the kind of the messiness of life, and that's what the book is geared toward a lot. If you had 20 minutes and you had to get to a dance recital or your boys' soccer practice, let's say, what would you do? What would you make for dinner?
I'd probably have, if I had some boneless, skinless chicken breasts or thighs, I would put some olive oil in a pan. I would sear them until they were nicely browned on both sides, but not cooked through in the middle. Then I'd put them to the side. And then in the same skillet, I would saute up some garlic or onions or shallots or leeks, some sort of onion family thing. Saute up a bunch of that. And then I would add in any other vegetables I might have, or like half a head of broccoli. I'd chop that up, and I'd add in some rice or some very small pasta and stir it till everything was all nicely coated with the oil. And then I would add in some chicken broth or vegetable broth if you wanted, and put the chicken breasts or thighs. Then I'd put the lid on, I'd let that cook till the rice was like halfway down, or the pasta was. Then I'd put the half-cooked chicken back on top of the rice and vegetable mixture and finish cooking that for 10 minutes.
Nice.
That's what I would do.
That sounds like dinner.
So that's a skillet meal. So like that's one of the things, there's, I talk about it, there's an arroz con pollo recipe in it, there's a chicken piccata recipe in it. But the other thing is even shorter is just making a pan sauce. If you cook something, you sear up any protein, steak, shrimp, fish, chicken in a pan, and you let the little bits that are, brown bits stay in the pan with the oil, and then you turn up the heat and you pour in some white wine or any kind of liquid, and it sizzles and it releases all the little brown bits from the bottom of the pan, and then you can add some more broth or water and then a little lemon juice maybe and some herbs, and then that is your pan sauce, and you put that right back over whatever it is that you had browned. And you could just use this over and over again. It's like you use it with leeks, you use it with rosemary, you use it with, you just can keep changing up the ingredients. But learning how to make a very simple 5-minute pan sauce is a very good trick.
Nice. So since a lot of this involves your kids and having them be part of the whole process, let's say, is it acceptable to use the same techniques to teach your kids how to mix cocktails?
Yes.
Hypothetically,
Yeah,
and let's say
hypothetically.
hypothetically you recorded your 9-year-old mixing you a martini and put it on YouTube. Would that make you a bad person, just hypothetically speaking?
When you say bad person, no, I think, hey, look, life skills come in different ways, and if it's make mommy a cosmopolitan, that's, it's a useful skill. I mean, I don't know.
I needed your validation.
Yes, you've got it.
Thank you.
I mean, I think anything, it's really, the other thing too is like everything's like a little science experiment to them, so, I mean, unfortunately they can't taste and be like, this needs more vodka, this needs more cranberry juice, but if they could.
Well, mine are in high school now, so they
okay.
What's the worst meal your kids have either made or contributed to?
My kid, Charlie, once decided that he wanted to see what would happen if he inverted the proportions of baking soda and flour in making muffins. And we had a friend coming over for dinner. It was actually really, really cute because this friend, Christopher Idone, some of you may remember him. He was a cookbook author from way back when, Glorious Food, Glorious American Food. Really dear friend of mine. I edited one of his books years ago. And the kids was very cute. They actually helped me cook. They actually really cooked the meal for him out of one of his cookbooks. He was coming over for dinner. But then Charlie decided he wanted to take one of his muffin recipes and have this experiment. At first I was doing the mom thing where no, that's not gonna, that's not gonna work. And I was like, I can say it won't work, but he'll really remember what happens if he does it. So he did it, and we were all sort of like taking a bite, and we sort of, it was that weird moment of like, do you pretend it's good? Do you like spit it out? They were so bitter and awful. And,
So he's 2 cups of baking soda?
2 cups of baking soda and like a tablespoon of flour. So it was just disgusting. Yeah, don't try that at home.
Don't. So Katie's got at least 2 more events to get to today, so we should let her get going. Thank you for being here. It was really a blast.